Today, the federal Liberals are expanding restrictions on Canadians with regard to COVID-19. And the restrictions that the Liberal government has put in place are pretty extreme when it comes to limitations on Canadians' charter rights, including the freedom to move. Now, look, we need to stop the spread of COVID-19, but it's a year into the pandemic, and we have tools like rapid tests, therapeutics, and vaccines. But they're not widely deployed in Canada because Justin Trudeau's government has failed to get us there. So the question becomes, with every restriction that Justin Trudeau is putting in place on our civil liberties, there should be an answer as to when those restrictions are going to end, under what circumstance. Now, yesterday I asked the government if vaccinated Canadians would be exempt from travel restrictions. Their answer was no. So today I pressed them on this issue. Have a listen.
Over a year after COVID-19 started to spread, the world has learned a lot about how to fight it. But Canadians are still being asked to sacrifice with no end in sight. Canadians need vaccines, deployed rapid tests, and information to secure our future and rebuild our economy. By now, the Prime Minister should be telling Canadians what's being done to eventually safely lift restrictions, not just putting new ones in place. How many million Canadians need to be vaccinated before restrictions are lifted?
The Honourable Minister.
Speaker, every step of the way, we've been there for provinces and territories as we have fought COVID-19 together, whether it's through provision of billions of dollars to ensure that provinces and territories have the capacity to test, to contact trace, to safely isolate, whether it's to provide personal protective equipment, to purchase testing or vaccinations. That's what we have been doing, Mr. Speaker, supporting provinces and territories every step of the way. Vaccines are an important tool in seeing the end of this pandemic, and I thank all Canadians for trying so hard together to protect each other.
I just want to point out, I want to remind the honourable members, je m'excuse, vous avez un rappel au règlement, c'est par rapport à...
Do you have a point of order?
I want to remind all the members who are joining us virtually today, the arm on their headset, sometimes it's too close to your mouth, sometimes it's too far. Rule of thumb is 1.5 centimeters away from where your mouth comes to an end right here. So that's probably a good one, just below or just above, and that works out well for those who aren't quite in the metric yet, about 1/2 inch. The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
It's actually interesting you said that, Mr. Speaker, because I'd love to be having this debate in the House. But the minister couldn't answer my question. And it's a question that relates to when life gets back to normal. And, limiting Canadians' charter rights, limiting their movements, preventing them from entering their own homes and having to go to quarantine facilities are extreme measures that should have clear end criteria. They must be temporary. And a year into COVID, the Liberals must start telling Canadians how and when they will be safely lifted. So no word salad. How many million Canadians need to be vaccinated before restrictions are lifted?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, every step of the way as the science and research has evolved around COVID-19, Canada has been guided in our response by that science and evidence. And in fact, quarantines are an important measure in protecting Canadians from the importation of the virus and, of course, now the importation of variants. Every step of the way, Mr. Speaker, we have followed research and evidence. We'll continue to do that, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank all Canadians for the sacrifices they're making to keep each other.
Justin Trudeau has no plan to end restrictions. If he did, he'd be able to answer my questions, but he doesn't. What's even worse is that the federal Liberals today, at the same time, are asking for money, your money, to expand these restrictions, right? Now, look, people that are out of work because the Trudeau Liberals have put them out of work for this long because they haven't been able to come up with a plan to end restrictions, need support. But at this point in time, the federal government shouldn't just be spending money. They should be able to tell you when restrictions are going to end or under what circumstances or what information at the very least they need to get to be able to come up with that plan and then explain why they don't have that information. It's very frustrating. So today I was asked to speak on this bill to essentially spend more money on expanding restrictions for a longer period of time. I want you to have a listen. The Liberals want you to think that we should just sign off on this without asking for better. Listen to my speech.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So we're here today debating a bill ostensibly to support Canadians given the pandemic. And, that's important. It's important for us to support Canadians. But we're a year into the pandemic now. And I'm wondering if the government is missing the boat a little bit. I mean, a year ago, when parliamentarians came together, in the midst of the first lockdowns, those restrictions, those lockdowns, those measures that we were putting in place for Canadians to support them through that were designed to buy government's time to figure out exactly what COVID-19 was, how it spread, who was most affected, how put in place testing systems, put in place the things that we needed to do to produce therapeutics, vaccines, get our hospitals ready. That was a year ago. And around the world, I mean, I would just like to pause and say it's actually miraculous what's happened. I mean, vaccines have been developed, therapeutics have been developed, rapid tests have been developed. These are all things that should be deployed widely in Canada, a G7 country by now. And here we're sitting here talking about a bill which, yes, the support is important, but the support in this bill is necessary because we don't have an end in sight from this federal government yet. And that's a huge problem. We're continuing to ask Canadians to sacrifice more and sacrifice the hope of jobs, of recovery, of reunion, of safety, of mental health without having that path forward. And it's because we don't have the information that we need from the federal government to have that end in sight. Now, I want to talk about what this means in the context of a very personal human face. My cousin Eric. So I am my dad's side of the family is a big French Catholic family, 8 brothers and sisters, countless dozens of grandchildren and dozens of great grandchildren, and none of us grew up in wealth. But everybody's worked hard. And this year at Christmas, my cousin Eric phoned me. He's 27 and he's going to get married. And this is really great. And normally this would be such a big cause for celebration. But there was 2 things that really bothered me about the conversation that we had. Number one, how hopeless he sounded. If you knew him, he's just one of the most, he's got such a sense of humor. He's always so positive. And just, the first thing he said was, I don't know how we're going to get a house. I have no idea. That's just off the table for us. And that's wrong. And he said it's because, they've had, him and his fiance, Jessica, have had very tough times. I mean, Jessica, she's a businesswoman. She put together a dog grooming business that got very successful, and then the restrictions shut that down numerous times. And Eric works at a box manufacturing plant, and he's the job that he has. Whenever he tells people, he's like, "Well, I work at a box manufacturing plant." I hate that he kind of shrinks back because he's an essential worker in the pandemic right now. I mean, how many of you listening to this, Madam Speaker, how many people listening to this speech today have had something delivered in a box over the last year, right? And where I think that these bills are failing is they're failing Eric and Jessica. First of all, the government's response has largely been classist. Let's be honest. We haven't really addressed the fact that people that work in box manufacturing plants, in grocery stores, on the front lines, really don't have a lot of hope because their lives are actually on the line. They're the most at risk for transmission right now, right? And they don't want CERB forever. They want safe working conditions. They want a prospect to move forward. And like for Eric and Jessica, they want a wedding and they want to be able to get a house. And I don't see anything in this bill or anything that the government has done that has that end date in sight. If this bill did what it was supposed to do, it should be tied to things like the amount of vaccinated people in Canada. We should be starting to set targets around vaccination, the amount of rapid tests deployed in plants like Eric works at, right? So that we don't have to just continue to put restrictions on Canadians without telling them what they're getting out of it. That's the reality, is we keep putting more and more restrictions on Canadians, but we're not explaining to them when they end and under what circumstances. And that should be concerning to every member on here. If everything is going so well, then why can't we tell Canadians when the end is in sight, right? I mean, yesterday I asked the transport minister a simple question. You know, would a vaccinated Canadian be subject to the same travel restrictions that the government put in place? And they didn't really have an answer for that. Why? Why can't we be talking about better systems than just curfews and putting people in quarantine hotels and more restrictions when we have tools like rapid tests that haven't been widespread deployed across the country, or we have tools like vaccines and they haven't been brought into the country, and we don't have a date in sight for this. The government needs to take a leadership role. They need to work with every party in Parliament. They need to work with all premiers of all political stripe and put together a plan so that we're not coming back to Parliament just to debate more and more extensions of restrictions that require us to pay people for taking away their freedom and their liberty and their hope and their mental health and their way of doing things, right? I just don't accept that this is where we're at. We're having the same debate. This is the same debate that we were having a year ago. Why? I could accept that, and I could go to Eric and to Jessica and say, you know what, here we are. I could accept that if we didn't have better ways of doing things, but the world has produced them. We need to start tying bills like this and measures like this to hard dates and hard plans for recovery. And that's what's missing in this bill right now. And frankly, we're actually abdicating our responsibility as parliamentarians, because the amount of money that we're spending on these stopgap solutions are bankrupting the future of people like Eric and Jessica. Right? Yes, we need to be supporting people through lockdowns. Of course we do. But the more and more money that we spend right now, I know people hate talking about debt levels in this country, but we are going into so much debt as a country that the interest payment on that debt, the credit card payment on that debt is going to bankrupt our country's ability to spend things on things like affordable housing in the future. Every time we have to make an interest payment to another country for the amount of money that we're spending on stopgap solutions now, it means another road that can't be built in the future, or a hospital that can't be built, or an affordable housing complex, or whatever. Right? We are making a choice. We're making a choice to continue these temporary measures versus coming up with a long-term plan. And that's what's wrong. And that's what we're missing here. And I get it. We're arguing all about the technicality of these programs and extending them, but people don't want to stay on CERB forever. They don't want to stay on long-term support. They want hope, and they want a way out of the pandemic. And we've got those tools. They exist in the world now. They just have not been deployed in Canada. So the government's got to get its act together. It's got to start answering questions like, well, you know what, if we don't know about the vaccine being tied to travel restrictions, we're going to find that out by X date. These are the data points that we need. This is how we're getting them. And then be giving status updates to Canadians, right? You can't just keep taking away freedom, taking away the hope of living a good life without a plan. And here we are. We're spending all of this money, and Eric and Jessica, I can't tell them the answer to. I don't know if you're going to have a wedding next year. I don't know if you're going to be on CERB. Sorry, Jessica, I don't know if you're going to be able to practice your business. And that for every single one of us, of all political stripe, that is not acceptable a year in. We all have to demand better, because Eric deserves better, Jessica deserves better, every single Canadian deserves better. They deserve hope. And that's what we should be fighting for. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
What really concerns me is that we are in the biggest medical catastrophe in a century, the biggest threat to Canada since the Second World War. And we're being told, don't worry, it's the Bobby McFerrin solution, be happy, it'll be okay. By September, everybody will be okay. I have so many small businesses in my riding that won't be around come September.
That's right.
So it'll be tough luck to them. The question I want to ask, though, is the failure to address the vaccine crisis. We knew this was coming. It was the same with our incapacity to deal with PPE. We're being told, don't worry, the Europeans will be nice to us. Well, that doesn't cut it with the new variant strain that they say is going to hit us like a hurricane. Novavax vaccine, not ready for at least 2 months. The NRC plant, still under construction. I'd like to ask my honourable colleague about the absolute failure of this government and this nation to be able to protect its people by seizing the tools that were necessary in what is the biggest medical crisis we've seen to actually take a lead on vaccines rather than hoping that the Europeans will be nice to us. That's not going to cut it when the new variant strain hits.
For Calgary Nose Hill.
My colleague is absolutely right. The government's vaccine strategy is an abject failure. What people who are watching this want to know is what we're going to do to fix it. And, I just want to say the colleague who asked my question, the question to me is from the New Democratic Party. I've worked with them, with people in the bloc, and we don't agree on everything, but we agree on the fact that we need to do better. And, the government, it's incumbent upon the government to work across party lines and admit this failure. Right? That's the first step to fixing a problem, is admitting the failure, to say it's not okay. It's not Bobby McFerrin. And we need to move forward. So that's what we're all working on here in the House of Commons. And I encourage the government to take these concerns seriously, because we can't be waiting until September for some sort of hope that might never come.
Justin Trudeau is wrong when the New Democratic Party, the Bloc, and the Conservatives all agree on something, as they did in that speech that I just gave, right? We need to be doing better. We're a year into the pandemic. The tools to help safely lift restrictions exist, but Justin Trudeau can't answer how he's doing that. And that is a huge problem for any Canadians. It is not acceptable for the government to continue to ask Canadians to sacrifice more, be it their health and safety, their jobs, their mental health, without an end in sight or a plan or involving Canadians. It's not enough for the Trudeau Liberals just to be like, everything's fine, guys, take our word for it, when it clearly isn't. This is what I'm fighting for, and this is what I ask all of you to help me fight for as well. Working hard for you in Ottawa. Have a great day.